We gave your wedding fund to your sister. She deserves a royal wedding. Dad said it like he was proud. I didn't cry. I just looked at my fiancé. He stood up, pulled out his phone, and said, "Should I tell them what I do for a living?" My sister's smile disappeared. Before I tell you what he showed them, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from right now. I want to see how far this story travels. To understand why my family looked at my fiancé, Jared, and saw a failure, you have to understand the horn effect. It is a cognitive bias where one single negative trait blinds you to everything else. For my parents, Richard and Lisa, that negative trait was flannel. Because Jared drove a 10-year-old truck and wore work boots, their brains literally filtered out his genius. They didn't see the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing to prove. They saw a lack of ambition. They saw a project I needed to fix. They assumed he was empty-handed because he wasn't waving a Rolex in their faces. They saw what they wanted to see. So when my father slid that envelope across the mahogany table to my sister Alyssa, stealing the $25,000 legacy fund he had promised me for years, he didn't think he was robbing me. He thought he was correcting a mistake. He thought he was investing in the winner. I sat there, frozen. But I wasn't in shock. I was calculating. I opened the invisible ledger I had been keeping in the back of my mind for 26 years. This wasn't about the money. $25,000 was just cash. I could earn that. This was about the final entry in a lifetime of emotional debt. Entry 1, the time I missed my own college graduation to manage the contractors for their kitchen remodel because they were too busy vacationing in Cabo. Value, 0 gratitude. Entry 2, the 3 years I spent managing my mother's rental properties for free, saving them management fees, only to be told I wasn't ambitious enough because I preferred plants to boardrooms. Value, disrespect. Entry 3, the weekends Jared and I spent landscaping their estate, saving them tens of thousands in labor, while they joked about Jared being our gardener behind his back. The ledger was long. It was heavy. It was suffocating. And that check sitting in front of my sister? That was the final transaction. It was the moment that bankrupted my love for them. The balance was now 0. "You're right, Dad," I said. My voice was steady. It sounded like a judge reading a verdict. "Alyssa does need the help. We'll be fine." I stood up. I took Jared's hand. I didn't look back at my sister, who was clutching the money like a lifeline. I didn't hug my mother. I walked out of that dining room with the precision of a chief executive officer closing a losing division. We drove home in silence. When we pulled into the driveway of our small, secluded farmhouse, I didn't cry. I walked inside, locked the door, and deleted my mother's number from my favorites list. Then, I canceled the landscaping crew I had scheduled for their property next week. I logged into the management portal for Mom's Rentals and removed myself as the administrator. I forwarded all tenant emails directly to her personal inbox with a simple auto-reply, "No longer managing this account." I sat on our porch, looking out at the acres of land Jared and I owned, land my parents didn't know about because they never bothered to drive this far out. They saw a small house and assumed poverty. They didn't see the peace. I was done performing. I was done auditing their affection and finding it short. I had closed the ledger. But they didn't know that yet. They thought they had just saved $25,000. They had no idea they had just cost themselves everything. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was Alyssa. She didn't call to thank me. She called to perform. "You won't believe what we did with the extra budget," she said, her voice breathless with the high of spending money she didn't earn. "We upgraded to the platinum floral package. Peonies imported from Holland. And I switched my dress to the Vera Wang. The one Mom cried over." I held the phone away from my ear as she listed the upgrades. Custom linens. A string quartet. A champagne tower. She was listing price tags, not experiences. "It's going to be so high-end," she gushed. "Honestly, Nat, I don't know how you live such a small life. Doesn't it bother you? Just sitting out there in the middle of nowhere with nothing? I looked out my window at the rolling hills of our property. I looked at the barn where Jared kept his vintage motorcycle collection, fully restored, fully paid for. I looked at the deed to our land sitting in the safe, stamped and paid in full. And that's when I realized the fundamental difference between us. It wasn't just taste. It was sociology. My family was drowning in loud debt. They wore their net worth on their sleeves, but it was all leased. My father drove a luxury sedan he didn't own. My mother wore designer bags charged to credit cards that were maxed out. Alyssa was planning a wedding she couldn't afford to impress people she didn't like. They were loud because they were empty. They needed the noise of consumption to drown out the silence of their actual insolvency. Jared and I? We were quiet wealth. We didn't need to perform success because we possessed it. We didn't need logos because we had equity. Our wealth was in the soil, in the intellectual property locked in Jared's patents, in the freedom of waking up without a single creditor owning a minute of our time. They mistook our silence for poverty. They didn't understand that true power doesn't need to shout. I'm happy for you, Alyssa, I said. My voice was flat. It sounds very expensive. It is, she snapped, sensing the lack of envy in my tone. But that's the point, isn't it? You have to spend money to look like money. She hung up. She had gotten what she wanted, an audience. 10 minutes later, my father called. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. I need you at the country club on Saturday, Richard said. For the firm's anniversary brunch? I asked. I thought it was executive board only. It is, he said. But I need someone to manage the seating chart and check in the VIPs. The event coordinator quit this morning. I paused. You want me to work the door? Why not ask Alyssa? She knows all the partners. Don't be ridiculous, Natalie, he huffed. Alyssa is the guest of honor. She's getting married. She can't be seen working the clipboard. She needs to be networking. Besides, you're good at organization. It's what you do. There it was. The hierarchy. Alyssa was the show pony, I was the stable hand. Alyssa was too important to work, I was too invisible to matter. And listen, he lowered his voice, everything has to be perfect. I got a tip that my silent partner might finally show up. The angel investor. If he walks through those doors, I need him treated like royalty. He's the only reason we're still floating. I tightened my grip on the phone. The silent partner. The mystery savior who had bailed him out 2 years ago. The man Richard idolized but had never met. I'll be there, I said. Good, he said. Wear something professional. Try not to look like you just came from a garden. The line went dead. He thought he was ordering a servant. He didn't realize he had just invited the executioner. That night, the house was quiet. Not the empty quiet of loneliness, but the heavy, insulated quiet of a bank vault. I found Jared in his study, surrounded by schematics. He didn't look up when I entered. He wants me to work the door, I said. Check in. Coat check. Seating charts. Jared set his pen down. He turned his chair to face me. His expression was unreadable, the kind of stillness you see in a predator right before it strikes. And are you going? He asked. I have to, I said, leaning against the doorframe. If I don't, he'll blame me for ruining the vibe when his silent partner doesn't show up. He's terrified this investor is going to pull the plug. Apparently, the firm is bleeding cash. Jared stood up. He walked over to the safe in the corner of the room, the one I assumed held our property deeds and his grandfather's watch. He spun the dial with a rhythmic clicking sound that echoed in the silence. He should be terrified, Jared said. He pulled out a thick leather binder and tossed it onto the desk. It landed with a heavy thud. Sit down, Nat. I sat. There are 2 things you need to know before we go to this brunch, he said. His voice was different. The softness was gone. This was the voice of a man who commanded boardrooms. First, the patent for the synthetic enzyme I've been developing? The deal closed this morning. Zeta Pharmaceuticals acquired it for $120 million. The air left the room. $120 million. I stared at him. He was wearing a faded t-shirt with a hole in the collar. But that's not the important part, he continued, as if discussing the weather. The important part is about your father. He opened the binder. Inside were financial documents. Profit and loss statements. Loan agreements. And at the top of every page, the logo for Apex Holdings LLC. 2 years ago, your father's consultancy was insolvent. He had leveraged the house, the cars, even his life insurance. He was days away from bankruptcy. He was going to lose everything, including the tuition for your final year of certification. I looked at the dates. It aligned perfectly with the time my father had suddenly started buying new suits and bragging about a turnaround. I couldn't let that happen to you, Jared said. I knew the shame would destroy him and the fallout would hurt you. So, I created Apex Holdings. I approached him anonymously through an intermediary. I bought 51% of his firm. I cleared his debts. I put him on a salary. My hand started to shake. You are the silent partner? I am the silent partner, Jared confirmed. Every time he brags about his genius investor at dinner, he's talking about me. Every time he mocks my truck or asks when I'm going to get a real job, he is insulting the man who signs his paychecks. I looked at the documents. My father wasn't a tycoon. He was an employee. And my fiancé, the man my family treated like a stray dog they wished would wander off, was his boss. Why didn't you tell me? I whispered. Because I didn't want you to feel like you owed me, he said. And because I wanted to see if they would ever treat me with respect without knowing I owned them. I wanted them to pass the test. He closed the binder. The snap of the rings sounded like a gunshot. They failed, he said. He picked up his phone and dialed a number. Taylor, he said into the receiver. I need the Navy bespoke ready for Saturday. Yes. And prep the car. The vintage Aston Martin. He hung up and looked at me. His eyes were cold, hard, and absolutely terrifying. Tell Richard you'll work the door, Jared said. I'll be there at noon. It's time the angel investor finally made an appearance. The country club smelled like old money and new desperation. I stood by the entrance of the grand ballroom, holding a clipboard like a shield. My father had been specific. Manage the flow, he had said. Don't let the riffraff in. The irony was suffocating. The room was a sea of pastel linen and leased luxury. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne that cost more per bottle than my father had in his checking account. And in the center of it all was my sister, Alyssa. She was wearing the money. Literally. Her dress was a structural masterpiece of white silk, the upgraded designer gown she had bragged about. On her arm was a limited edition handbag. On her finger, a rock that caught the chandelier light. I looked at her and I didn't see fashion. I saw my legacy fund. I saw the $25,000 they had stolen from me, draped over her body, parading around the room, laughing at jokes made by men she despised. It was the ultimate display of loud debt. Natalie. My mother snapped her fingers at me from across the foyer. She didn't wave. She snapped. Like I was a golden retriever that had wandered off leash. I walked over. She was adjusting Richard's tie with frantic, jerky movements. My father was sweating. He looked pale, vibrating with a manic energy that told me he was terrified. Fix the place cards at the head table, Lisa hissed at me, not making eye contact. Someone moved the CEO of Zeta Pharma to the second tier. We need him next to your father. I'll handle it, I said. And try to look pleasant, she added, scanning my simple black dress with a critical eye. You look like you're attending a funeral. Maybe I am, I thought. Where is he? Richard muttered, checking his watch for the 10th time in a minute. He said noon. It's 12:05. Who? I asked, playing my part. The investor, he snapped. The silent partner. If he doesn't show, this whole charade falls apart. I promised the board they'd meet the money behind the magic today. Maybe he got lost, Alyssa chirped, floating over to us with a glass of champagne. She looked me up and down. Oh, Nat working the door? Fitting. She took a sip, her eyes gleaming with malice. Where's your lumberjack? She asked. Did the truck break down on the highway? Or did you just not invite him because you knew he'd embarrass us? My mother let out a short, cruel laugh. Honestly, it's for the best. We have serious people here today, Natalie. We can't have Jared standing around in grease-stained denim talking about whatever it is he does. Digging holes? He's in biotech, Mom, I said quietly. Sure, Alyssa smirked. And I'm the Queen of England. Face it, Nat. He's a dead weight. You're just too stubborn to cut the rope. Richard didn't join in the mockery. He was too busy staring at the door, his eyes wide with panic. He's not coming, Richard whispered. He's going to hang me out to dry. He'll be here, I said. How would you know? Alyssa scoffed. I looked at my watch. 12:10. Because he's never late, I said. At that exact moment, the heavy oak doors of the ballroom swung open. The chatter in the room didn't stop all at once, it rippled into silence, starting from the entrance and washing over the crowd like a wave. The valet captain had opened the doors. And walking through them wasn't the man they expected. It wasn't a flannel-wearing gardener. It wasn't a charity case. It was Jared. But it wasn't the Jared they knew. He was wearing a navy bespoke suit that fit him like armor. His hair was styled. On his wrist was a vintage Patek Philippe, the kind of watch you don't buy, you inherit or you earn at an auction for 6 figures. He didn't look like he was digging a hole. He looked like he owned the ground, the building, and the sky above it. He walked into the room with a stride that ate up the space. He didn't look at the floor. He looked straight ahead. The room went deadly quiet. Richard's jaw actually dropped. He blinked, confused, his brain trying to reconcile the image of the loser boyfriend with the titan walking toward him. Oh God, my mother whispered. What is he doing here? He's going to ruin everything. Richard snapped out of his trance. He started marching toward Jared, his face flushing red with anger. He was going to intercept him. He was going to kick him out before the real investor arrived. Security, Richard hissed to a waiter as he passed. Get ready to escort a guest out. I stood by the seating chart, my hand resting on the leather binder. I didn't move to stop him. I just watched. The trap was sprung. Richard didn't get to him first. The CEO of Zeta Pharmaceuticals did. The man Richard had been trying to impress all afternoon, the titan of industry he had moved to the head table, stood up. He didn't just stand, he rushed. He walked right past my father, ignoring Richard's outstretched hand, and made a beeline for the man in the navy suit. Jared, the CEO said, his voice booming across the quiet room. I didn't know you'd be here. I wanted to thank you personally for the smooth transition on the patent acquisition. The board is thrilled. Richard froze. His hand was still in the air, grasping at nothing. He looked from the CEO to Jared, his brain misfiring. You know him? Richard stammered. You know Natalie's boyfriend? The CEO looked at my father with confusion. Boyfriend? Richard, this is the man who just sold us the enzyme protocol for $120 million. He's the most brilliant mind in biotech. The room gasped. It wasn't a polite gasp. It was the sound of oxygen being sucked out of the building. Alyssa dropped her champagne glass. It shattered on the marble floor, but nobody looked down. They were too busy looking at the gardener. Richard's face went from pale to a dangerous shade of purple. He couldn't process the shift. His narrative, the one where he was the king and Jared was the peasant, was dissolving, and his ego couldn't handle it. He snapped. "I don't care what he sold," Richard hissed, stepping into Jared's personal space. "This is a private event for shareholders and partners. You are neither. You are trespassing. Get out before I have security drag you out." Jared didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He looked at my father with the same dispassionate interest a scientist shows a microbe under a slide. "I wouldn't do that, Richard," Jared said. His voice was low, but it carried. "It's bad form to evict the owner." "Owner?" Richard laughed, a high, hysterical sound. "You own a pickup truck and a pair of boots. You don't own anything in this room." Jared reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen once, twice, then turned it around so Richard, and the entire board of directors sitting at the nearby tables, could see. "Should I tell them what I do for a living?" Jared asked. It was the question that ended my family. On the screen was a digital share certificate. The logo at the top was Apex Holdings LLC. The name on the certificate was Jared Vance. The percentage of ownership in Richard's consultancy firm was 51%. "I am Apex Holdings," Jared said. "I am the silent partner you've been bragging about for 2 years. I am the angel investor who paid off your debts, covered your payroll, and saved you from bankruptcy when you were insolvent." Richard stared at the screen. He looked at the logo he saw on his paychecks every month. He looked at the man he had mocked at dinner every Sunday. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He staggered back, gripping a chair for support. "No," Richard whispered. "That's impossible. You dig holes." "I build foundations," Jared corrected. "And I tear them down when they're rotten." He swiped the screen. A new document appeared. It was a formal notice of dissolution. As majority shareholder, Jared addressed the room now, speaking to the board. "I have a fiduciary duty to ensure the firm operates with the highest ethical standards. Unfortunately, the managing partner, Richard, recently misappropriated funds. I never touched the company accounts." Richard shouted, panic rising in his voice. "You stole from your daughter," Jared said. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "You took $25,000 that was promised to Natalie and gave it to Alyssa to fund a party. If you will steal from your own child to fund your vanity, you will steal from these shareholders. It is a character flaw. It is a liability. And I don't invest in liabilities." He tapped the screen one final time. "I am triggering the dissolution clause," Jared said. "I am pulling my capital. The partnership is over, Richard. Effective immediately." My mother let out a sob. It was the sound of her lifestyle dying. Alyssa looked down at her dress, the dress bought with stolen money, and looked like she wanted to tear it off. Richard stood there, stripped of his title, his reputation, and his future in less than 3 minutes. He looked at me then. He looked at the daughter he had made work the door. He looked for mercy. I held my clipboard against my chest. I looked at the man who had taught me that love was conditional and status was everything. I looked at him, and I felt absolutely nothing. I turned to Jared. "I think my shift is over." Jared offered me his arm. "Let's go home, Nat." We walked out. We left the shattered glass, the shattered ego, and the shattered family behind us. We didn't look back. The silence in that room was the loudest thing I had ever heard. The fallout wasn't an explosion. It was a liquidation. By the time Richard left the country club, his reputation was already trading at zero. The CEO of Zeta Pharmaceuticals didn't keep quiet. In the world of high-stakes business, integrity is the only currency that matters, and word traveled fast that Richard had stolen family funds to finance a vanity project. His consultancy didn't just lose its majority shareholder, it lost its credit rating. Clients cancelled. Lines of credit were frozen. The angel hadn't just left the building, he had taken the building's foundation with him. Alyssa's wedding was the first casualty. Without the salary Jared had been secretly paying our father, the cash flow dried up within a week. The checks for the imported peonies bounced. The Vera Wang dress was returned for a restocking fee. She didn't get married at the country club. I heard through the grapevine she got married at the courthouse in a dress off the rack. It was the first time in her life she had to live within her actual means, and from what I heard, the silence was deafening. 2 days after the brunch, my mother called. I stared at the phone. I knew what was coming. It would be the gaslight maneuver. She would try to rewrite history. She would try to convince me that they were actually proud of me, that they were just pushing us to succeed, that they always knew Jared was a diamond in the rough. I answered, but I didn't speak. Natalie, she breathed, her voice trembling with a performance of victimhood. We need to talk. Your father he's not doing well. We didn't know, honey. We didn't know Jared was that successful. If you had just told us, we would have treated him differently. That was it. The confession. I know, Mom, I said. That's the problem. You only treat people with respect when you think they can buy you something. We're family, she cried. Doesn't that count for anything? You can't just cut us off. We're your blood. I audited the accounts, Mom, I said, my voice calm, cold, and final. And I found that the cost of knowing you is too high. The account is closed. I hung up. I blocked the number. Then I blocked Alyssa. Then Richard. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of hygiene. 6 months later, I woke up in a villa overlooking Lake Como. The air smelled like lemon and cypress. The silence here wasn't heavy, it was golden. I walked out onto the terrace. Jared was there, drinking espresso, looking out at the water. He wasn't wearing a suit, and he wasn't wearing flannel. He was wearing a white linen shirt, rolled at the sleeves, looking like a man who had absolutely nothing left to prove to anyone. We got married that afternoon in the garden. There were no guests. No audience. No performance. Just us, an officiant, and the mountains. The wedding cost $150,000, mostly for the villa rental and the private donation we made to a local heritage fund in our names. We didn't post photos. We didn't send announcements. We didn't need the world to validate us because we had validated ourselves. As I stood there, saying my vows to the man who had silently built an empire while the world called him a failure, I thought about the ledger. For 26 years, I had kept track of every hurt, every slight, every stolen moment. I had carried that debt around like a stone, waiting for my family to pay me back with love they didn't have. But standing there in the Italian sun, I realized something. You can't force a bad debtor to pay up. You can't make toxic people value you. The only way to balance the books is to write off the bad debt and walk away. I looked at Jared. I looked at the ring on my finger, not a symbol of status, but a promise of peace. I took a deep breath, and in my mind, I picked up that heavy, dusty ledger. I closed the cover. I locked the clasp. And I threw it into the deep, blue water of the lake. The books were balanced. I was free. If you've ever had to close the ledger on a toxic family member to save your own peace, share this story. You are not alone.